Book title: Madusa's Minds, Reflections of Ego version 1.0. Author: J.R. Wert. Chapter 63. Tangled Ties. The Silent Struggle of Ego Codependency. Codependency emerged into the public consciousness in the 1980s, primarily through the lens of the recovery movement, most notably within groups like Alcoholics Anonymous. Initially, the concept was tethered to the dynamics observed in relationships involving alcoholics and substance abusers, focusing on the partners or close family members who found their lives entangled with the habitual behaviors of addiction. However, as the years progressed, the understanding of codependency began to unfold further, revealing a complex tapestry of dysfunctional relationship patterns and behaviors that extended far beyond the confines of substance abuse. To comprehend codependency, one must delve into the complex layers of interpersonal dynamics, where an alarming disproportion often lurks. This emotional and behavioral condition undermines an individual's ability to participate in healthy, reciprocally fulfilling relationships. Its core is dominated by a profound longing to be indispensable, paired with an intense dependence on others for emotional or psychological nourishment. Those ensnared by codependency frequently display a tendency for self-sacrifice, consistently sidelining their own needs and aspirations while dedicating themselves to attending to others. Their inflated sense of responsibility surpasses mere care and concern, transforming into an unhealthy attachment, accompanied by a relentless compulsion to influence the emotions and behaviors of those around them. The manifestations are numerous and varied, forming a spectrum that oscillates from mild to severe. Low self-esteem frequently haunts the codependent individual, shadowed by persistent feelings of inadequacy, harsh self-judgment, and chronic comparison with others. This fragile self-concept often gives rise to an intense people-pleasing demeanor, a desperate attempt to circumvent conflict and garner the approval and contentment of others. Boundaries, which are essential for healthy interpersonal interactions, become blurred or non-existent. Codependents struggle to assert themselves, often yielding to others' needs and emotions, trapped in a cycle of reactivity that leaves them excessively vulnerable to external influences. The need for control is a paradoxical aspect of codependency. While codependents may appear submissive or overly accommodating, there's an underlying compulsion to influence situations, outcomes, and people, driven by deep-seated fears and a desire for predictability. This control can also extend inward, with individuals displaying a marked dependency on others for reassurance and fear of abandonment, leading them to endure harmful or unsatisfying relationships. Denial becomes a coping mechanism, a way to evade acknowledging one's submerged feelings, unmet needs, or the detrimental elements within a relationship. Intimacy, too, becomes a battlefield, with codependents either avoiding closeness or clinging desperately to it, haunted by the dread of abandonment. Consequently, they often experience a maelstrom of painful emotions, including shame, anxiety, resentment, and guilt, which can be overwhelming and persistent. Tracing the roots of codependency is like navigating a labyrinth, where every turn uncovers potential contributing factors. Yet a definitive origin remains elusive. Childhood, however, seems to be a critical stage where patterns of codependency often germinate. Dysfunctional family dynamics, particularly those where emotional expression was stifled or unpredictable, may give rise to an excessive adjustment to the moods and needs of others, often at the expense of the individual's own emotional well-being. Similarly, histories of abuse or neglect may sow the seeds of codependency as individuals learn to appease and placate others as a means to secure affection, approval, or safety. In families overshadowed by chronic illness, addiction, or other ongoing stressors, a person might be inadvertently cast into a caregiving role, fostering an environment ripe for codependent patterns to flourish. Ultimately, codependency is not just a personal struggle, but a condition sculpted by an amalgamation of individual, familial, and societal influences, which mirrors a complicated dance between personal traumas, familial expectations, and societal norms, all of which contribute to its genesis and perpetuation. Recognizing this interplay is crucial as it paves the way for its deeper understanding, not merely as a set of dysfunctional behaviors, but as a complex adaptive strategy rooted in an individual's life experiences and social context. The quiet conflict. Insights into intrapersonal ego codependency, expanding on the conventional understanding of codependency. An aspect frequently relegated to the background emerges, the sphere of intrapersonal dynamics, particularly the relationship with one's own ego. This internalized variant of codependency epitomizes a nuanced yet deep-seated conflict, a quiet yet persistent conflict between an individual's self-image and their ego. It's a condition of internal strife where dependence on the ego not only causes inner turmoil, but also poses a formidable impediment to personal development and self-awareness. At the heart of ego codependency lies hyper-self-awareness, a state characterized by an unrelenting fixation on self, especially in how one is perceived by others. This obsessive self-consciousness manifests in various ways: incessant over-analysis of social exchanges, seeking constant reassurance about one's appearance or actions, and a pervasive avoidance of scenarios where one's behaviors or performance might be spotlighted, all driven by the dread of judgment or criticism. This heightened self-vigilance often stems from profound insecurities, compounded by previous experiences of judgment or criticism that have left indelible marks on the psyche. Closely tied to this hyper-awareness is a marked defensiveness, a protective armour hastily donned when one senses the slightest threat to their beliefs, actions, or very identity. This defensive stance can make open, honest conversation a minefield. Individuals may react to feedback with hostility, interpreting it as an attack rather than constructive criticism. Or they may become excessively argumentative when their perspectives are challenged. More subtly, they might avoid or shut down discussions that veer too close to their personal truths. Often, this hypersensitivity to perceived threats can be traced back to a fragile self-concept, reinforced by past encounters where they felt dismissed or belittled. Then there's overcompensation, a behaviour steeped in a desperate need to prove one's worth or prowess, typically spurred by an underlying sense of inadequacy. It's allowed. Look at me dance, where individuals might boast excessively, bite off more responsibilities than they can chew to demonstrate their competence, or even embellish stories to cast themselves in a more flattering light. These actions are frequently compensatory mechanisms to counterbalance deep-seated insecurities or previous instances where they felt ignored or undervalued. Resistance to change. Another signpost of ego codependency showcases an individual's reluctance to embrace new ideologies, habits, or self-perceptions, primarily when these alterations pose a perceived threat to the ego's status quo. This resistance can manifest as an outright rejection of fresh ideas or perspectives, adherence to detrimental routines or patterns out of sheer habit, or a tendency to rationalize away the necessity for change. This hesitancy is rooted in a fear of the unfamiliar, coupled with an attachment to a specific identity or self-image that the individual is unwilling to alter. In the same vein, an intense attachment to labels reflects a deep-seated need to identify with certain roles, statuses, or achievements. This need is so ingrained that it eclipses the recognition of one's multifaceted self. It's evident in those who introduce themselves through their professional titles or who anchor their entire self-worth to particular roles or labels, becoming disoriented or distressed when these are jeopardized or removed. Such behavior often springs from a cultural emphasis on specific roles, or the belief that one's value is inextricably linked to external accomplishments. Lastly, a reluctance to admit mistakes can be a telling sign of ego codependency. Mistakes, instead of being embraced as learning opportunities, are seen as unbearable blemishes on one's self-image. Individuals might deflect blame, craft elaborate justifications for their errors, or shirk situations where they might be held accountable. This aversion often originates from a perfectionist streak or from past ordeals where errors were met with harsh criticism or punishment. Understanding ego codependency involves a journey of self-exploration, an unravelling of the tightly knotted threads formed from past experiences, fears, and societal expectations that have defined one's identity. It's a process not of self-rejection, but of courageous self-awareness. An invitation to dismantle these complex structures not with judgment, but with compassion, and to reconstruct a more authentic, cohesive self-narrative. from roots to realizations. The journey through ego codependency. Ego codependency doesn't arise in isolation. Its roots are deeply embedded in a confluence of factors including cultural norms, personal history, inherent personality traits, societal pressures. To truly understand its origins, we must examine these elements, recognizing how each contributes to the formation and reinforcement of the ego and how they collectively influence our behavior and self-perception. Consider the omnipresent cultural and societal reinforcements, the lattice upon which individuals often unwittingly plot the coordinates of their self-worth. Societies, with their hierarchies and awards, tend to sanctify external achievements, material bounty, and adherence to prescribed norms. This framework fosters an environment rife with competition and comparison, where self-esteem is tethered to a perpetual race for achievement. The ego, hungry for identity and validation, feasts in this climate, ballooning on a diet of recognition and social benchmarks. The manifestations are ubiquitous. Career triumphs and financial prosperity become yardsticks of personal value. Social media becomes a stage for the meticulous curation of self-image. Educational realms risk overshadowing individuality with the shadow of standardized achievement. The fallout? A brittle sense of self, precariously perched on the pedestal of external validation, susceptible to the tremors of failure and the incessant pursuit of a success often narrowly defined and externally imposed. Equally impactful, though perhaps less visible, are the scars of past traumas, particularly those etched during the malleable years of childhood. Traumatic experiences often compel the ego to erect formidable fortresses around one's psyche, a well-intentioned safeguard against further emotional distress. Yet, this armour, forged in the fires of pain and self-preservation, can distort into a confining shell, estranging individuals from their true selves and the rich depth and complete landscape of their emotions. Herein lie the roots of narcissistic tendencies, an insatiable craving for perfection, or an emotional aloofness, all manifestations of the ego's desperate bid to shield the self from vulnerability. The consequences are seldom benign, often spiralling into difficulties in forging meaningful connections, persistent sensations of inner emptiness, or the insidious creep of anxiety and the spectral haunts of post-traumatic stress. Hand in hand with past traumas walks the pervasive fear of vulnerability. This fear, born of the ego's aversion to perceived weakness, manifests in the reluctance to unveil one's authentic self, with all its inherent imperfections and uncertainties. The ego, ever the vigilant sentinel, deems such exposure perilous, a gateway to potential judgment, scorn, or emotional anguish. Individuals, swayed by this apprehension, often don a facade, revealing only the fragments deemed strong, palatable, or commendable. This masquerade, while offering illusory refuge, exacts a steep price: the stagnation of superficial relationships, the expanding weight of mental health struggles, and a dulled capacity for genuine human connection and empathetic interaction. Compounding these influences are the internalized expectations, the silent directions ingrained into the psyche from youth. These are the obligations and imperatives imparted by parents, educators, peers, and the media, a chorus of voices that over time can drown out the individual's inner rhythm. Guided, or rather, misguided by these internalized scripts, individuals may find themselves marching to a beat out of sync with their innate pulses. They chase careers incongruent with their passions, conform to societal molds at odds with their nature, and seek validation through adherence to these external blueprints. The result? An erosion of uniqueness, a simmering discontent beneath life's choices, and a susceptibility to burnout and psychological strain, all stemming from a life led astray from one's authentic being. In the dance with the ego, recognition that our steps are not preordained liberates us from its codependent grip. By dissecting its societal, cultural, personal, and psychological roots, we uncover the power to change the tempo, to improvise new moves, and to embrace a cadence in harmony with our true selves. The journey to untangle the web of ego codependency and harmonize it with our multifaceted persona is both relentless and enlightening. It requires a deep commitment, courage, and an exploratory dive into self-awareness. This path doesn't aim to obliterate the ego. Instead, it's about achieving equilibrium through understanding. Although the journey is complex, it's guided by various strategies, each offering a unique perspective to light the way. In the realm of this internal odyssey, mindfulness and meditation emerge as gentle yet potent allies. These practices provide a sanctuary from the turbulent seas of judgmental thoughts. They invite one to observe the storm from the shore, to understand that the essence of being is separate from the waves of ego-driven thoughts and emotions. By weaving meditation into the fabric of daily routine, focusing on the rhythmic flow of breath or the silent echo of a mantra, individuals find themselves in a tranquil space apart from their turbulent thoughts. This serene detachment is fertile ground for emotional regulation, self-awareness, and an inner clarity that acts as a beacon through the fog of ego impulses. Complementing this practice is the art of self-reflection, a silent dialogue with one's deepest self, through the intimate pages of a journal or the sacred tranquility of dedicated contemplation. Individuals are encouraged to turn their gaze inward, to dissect the origins of their behaviors, and to understand the strings that the ego might be pulling behind the curtain. This introspection, this courageous questioning of one's patterns, peels back the layers, revealing the designs the ego has woven over time. The revelations are not mere epiphanies, they are the keys to a kingdom of intentional decision-making, a realm where one reigns supreme over their actions, unshackled from the ego's dictatorship. Yet, no journey of self-discovery is complete without embracing vulnerability. That raw exposure of one's authentic self. To be vulnerable is to let the ego's defences crumble, to show the world one's true colours in a brave act of defiance against the ego's illusions of control. By daring to express genuine emotions, to venture beyond comfort zones, and to immerse oneself in the wisdom of thought leaders, individuals unlock the chains that bind them to superficiality. What emerges is a connection with oneself and others that's as deep as the ocean, a liberation as exhilarating as the open sky, and a resilience forged in the fires of faced fears. However, the mirror of self-reflection sometimes needs cleaning, and that's where external perspectives shine. Trusted friends, mentors, or therapists can offer reflections free from the smudges of our ego, providing clarity that one's internal compass might miss. Through heartfelt dialogues, professional counselling, or the communal solidarity of support groups, new perspectives emerge like dawn breaking the night's ego-driven narratives. These insights, these shared experiences, are the sunbeams that warm the soul, fostering empathy and lighting the way forward. In this landscape of self-discovery, one must cultivate the soil with continuous learning, nurturing a growth mindset that acknowledges the ego's limitations and embraces the infinite horizons of potential. By thirsting for knowledge through books, workshops, and personal challenges, individuals turn setbacks into stepping stones and mistakes into lessons, diminishing the ego's shadow with each new enlightenment. The journey culminates with a conscious detachment from the intoxicating elixir of external validation. It's about anchoring worth in the bedrock of intrinsic values, finding fulfillment in the treasure trove within, by setting goals that resonate with inner convictions, affirming one's worth lacking external applause, and distancing oneself from the relentless race for approval, especially in the digital coliseum of social media. Individuals reclaim their narratives. This newfound autonomy, this internal compass, not only steadies the ship amidst life's tempests, but also sets it sailing towards horizons that echo with the calls of passion and authenticity. In navigating these uncharted waters, it's vital to perceive each step taken, each method adopted, not as an isolated target, but rather as part of an ongoing expedition towards self-equilibrium. Here, the ego is repositioned from a commanding presence or a hindering weight to an accompanying voyager, equally engaged in the mutual pursuit of comprehensive harmony. Transcending ego codependency is like an elaborate expedition to one's genuine essence, a venture characterized by the bravery to confront entrenched tendencies and the empathy to comprehend, not criticize, them. This journey, while potentially as complex and daunting as confronting external codependencies, primarily hinges on an amplified self-consciousness and deliberate mindfulness exercises that aid in disentangling the knotted patterns of long-standing behaviors. Acknowledging the profound entwinement with the ego stands as the pivotal first stride towards recuperation, an enlightening moment that delineates the route ahead with lucidity, offering a blueprint for the ensuing transformation. The essence of this progression isn't about completely disassociating from the ego, but rather about reassembling a more wholesome rapport with it. It entails drawing new boundaries where the ego shifts from an overbearing authority to a constructive confederate, a resource utilized by the genuine self as a stepping stone to enlightenment, instead of an erratic force dictating the course of one's existence. This journey necessitates a diverse approach: mindfulness to ground oneself, introspection for grasping the intricacies of one's psyche, vulnerability for profound self and communal connections, and an unending desire for knowledge that propels development and flexibility. Additionally, embracing varied viewpoints augments one's comprehension, where curtailing the dependence on external admiration anchors one's self-esteem in more stable, nourishing soil. Adopting these strategies doesn't merely modify one's relationship with the ego, it catalyzes a life-altering transformation. The equilibrium established between ego-awareness and authentic self-insight initiates a more enriched, genuine life experience, imbuing relationships with the intense tints of satisfaction and affinity. In this balanced domain, existence reverberates with a deep orchestration of self-respect and mutual dependence, standing as a tribute to the victorious passage from the obscurity of ego codependency to the radiance of sincere self-union.